I have known him really since I was very young, and that's when he was a student in NSG, because my father used to teach at that point. So sort of in my memory, these years kind of come together, coalesce in a very strange way. I've known him as a student, and then I've known him as my director, and of course as a director, and very well known. To me, one thing that sort of immediately comes to mind when you think of Karanji is his warmth, is his humility, and his sort of unending curiosity. It was amazing that even sort of just 2 days before he passed away, or just before he went to hospital, there were things that he was wanting to learn and he was questioning. That whenever I used to go out, and I still regret that I didn't give it to him earlier, I saw a musical instrument which was quite unusual in Philippines, and I bought it. And the first person I thought was that I must buy it for Karanji. He used to collect these musical instruments, so it was lying with me. And when I heard he's in hospital, I said that I have to go and give it to him, and they said he may not even know that you've come. I said it doesn't matter, he will get to know, so I have to go and give it. Now, this kind of personal connection that he would make was a very special quality of Karanji. And also the way he used to encourage young people. I used to see that he would go to plays done by younger crowd. Even if it was not good, he would cull out what was good about it and comment on that. I know that in one production he didn't like the initial music that I had used, and he says, "Oh, that intrigued me, and I still have to find out why it was there." He didn't say that it was unnecessary and why did it was wrongly put, but that was his way of going about it. When I think about his theatre, it's quite amazing the kind of range with which he worked. It was, I think, the first kind of strong intervention in terms of very indigenous theatre at one level and a tremendous modern sensibility at another. And it was not, this combination was not being made in any self conscious kind of way. It was there as part of his personality. So anything that he would pick up, even a tragedy, in its presentation would become a celebration. And that's when you understood that how Indian in spirit it is, in a land where even deaths are celebrated. Everything becomes a kind of musical mela. That was the kind of spirit his work represented, and that is what really used to fascinate me. Initially, there was confusion as to where does one place it. I mean, sort of what is he trying to do? But I think one thing he said, which was very interesting and kind of made me understand him better, is when he did Barnum One with the repertory, a kind of outstanding production, and a kind of production which helped many of us to really understand the differences between the westernized kind of theatre and the spirit of the Indian theatre, and what are the differences, what are the strengths of each, what are the weaknesses. So it was something which conceptually clarified a lot of things for us. But more than that, since there were a lot of Shakespeare people, lovers, who were very upset, it was very different. And they said that, why did you do Shakespeare like this? Why, you almost distorted. He said, I did it like this because that's the only way I understand Shakespeare. That I cannot relate to it in any other way. And that to me became the key to understanding Karanji's work, that with his kind of varied background of the folk theatre, the commercial theatre, then, the Indian music, the North Indian exposure, it was extremely eclectic. It was extremely experimental. He was one person who was breaking all kinds of norms and was not scared. He was not scared of failures. So you went and saw a play which had just fallen flat, and he says, "हाँ ये अच्छा नहीं हुआ, ये नहीं चला." And that was it, so it would not really upset him too much. So he was one person who was evolving right till the end. We can't say that about many people. He was, at heart a nomad, moving from one place to another, and therefore gathering influences and impact from color and everything from all over. And he was somebody who constantly was wanting to try new things, constantly keeping in touch. And that's what kept him alive in a very different way from a lot of other masters that we know. So for me, sort of as a theatre person, he's a very special category to which he really belongs. Yeah, I've had the privilege of knowing the work and sort of the way of operating in both cases, because I was a student of Mr. Al-Qazi, and I joined NSD as a faculty when Karanji had taken over. So I got to see his style of working as well. Both great modernists, but in very different ways, and that kind of shows the variety of modernism in India. Al-Qazi schooled in a Western school of theatre, and therefore brought in that kind of precision, that kind of minimalism, and that kind of discipline into the work that he was doing and training students. Karanji trained in, as I said, sort of the Indian tradition and a wide range of that tradition, brought in that worldview. And also believed quite strongly that, sort of this is what our theatre should be all about. It should encompass a lot of variety and talent and different kind of energies in the way we look at it. So even if I were to really very briefly compare how the institution changed from Al-Qazi's time to Karanji's time, I would say that Al-Qazi's work had a great deal of perfection and precision, with a great deal of in-depth work into every text, every performance that we were to do. But it was also kind of predetermined by him. So, sort of students learnt by watching him teach, and as he made us do that work. But Karanji believed that students should learn by doing things, and therefore really, sort of getting down to handling material, putting it on stage. And so let us say that if we were to look at the curriculum in Al-Qazi's time, we used to have one production for the whole school once in 3 months or 4 months. In Karanji's time, he decided that for each class, there should be 2 productions in every term. So easily about 6 productions used to happen, where everybody should get an opportunity to be on stage, to do things, and learn by doing. There was also considerably less amount of discipline and less amount of precision. But he felt that it is in the process of doing that people will learn. So very clearly, 2 different approaches. Al-Qazi Saab's style of working was that, he really believed that the performance has to be a spectacle, and partly it was a historical necessity where theatre was really not respectable enough, that he had to prove that theatre can be very good and it's something to be respected. So Al-Qazi paid a lot of attention on the quality of performance. And therefore also to an extent ran it like the repertory mode, that performance standard became the criteria. But in Karanji's time, it was the chance that was given to students. So it was more a training process. And every performance that happened was no longer keeping primarily the audience in mind, but the person being trained in mind. He also was Karanji was very democratic in spirit, and believed that students coming, in a country like ours should have an exposure to the large variety of styles and approaches that are prevalent in the country. So the institution started inviting experts from all over the country to work with students. So they had much greater exposure to different styles, while in Mr. Al-Qazi's time, it was much more limited. Now that methodology had its advantages in the fact that you did fewer things but did them in greater depth. Here the advantage was that you had a much larger exposure and you could choose, but naturally it would suffer by way of its detailing and discipline. And of course he brought in a very strong component, Karanji, of music and of traditional arts. He believed quite strongly that the students should be aware of the Indian traditions, how they operate, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses. So he started inputs into the training program of that kind. Plus, he was quite aware of the fact that the whole country, the theatre workers, have no resources. And here was an institution with a lot of resources. Therefore, he constantly emphasized that this should be shared with the rest of the country. And therefore, the outreach program that the NSD has now was really initiated by him. So there were a lot of directions in which he was concerned about theatre in the country, about its interaction, and his own work, of course, reflected that variety. I don't think he fancied administration at all. He was an extremely restless, creative person. So you could have him working 48 hours a day if it was doing music or working in a production. But administration was clearly not part of his temperament. Disciplining was not part of his temperament. Organizing things was not part of his temperament. So I suppose he got restless and could recognize that he is not really helping the institution as an administrator, and therefore wanted to move on. The same happened in other institutions that he set up, great institutions. But sort of the kind of base that you set, very often you start getting trapped within that, and then he didn't know how to handle that, or it disillusioned him. For instance, he felt that what kind of artists are these in a repertory that he had formed, that sort of they're demanding permanence in the job rather than focusing on the work. So he should have understood that that will also happen. But his own temperament was of constantly giving, really finding it very difficult to impose discipline and things like that, which are very important for institution running. So temperamentally, I don't think he was suited for that. Karanji, when he joined NSD, my father was more or less looking after NSD, so that was the initial phase. But midway in his training, Al-Qazi took over as the director. So he worked under both as directors. But because my father was very interested in theatre in the whole country and its own traditions, etc., therefore, an ongoing dialogue between the two was always there. I remember Karanji visiting quite often, all the time, and sharing what he was doing. My father was very curious about what kind of work he's doing, his process, etc. So the linkage with my father remained because of their love of theatre in the regions, because of the traditional theatre, and because sort of sitting in Delhi, it was important for him, for my father, to know what's happening in other parts of the country. And he was quite impressed with Karanji's nature of work, and the range that he encompassed, and the understanding of music and everything that he brought together in his work. So I think it was a constant give and take that was happening. And then subsequently, because my father had this experience of running this institution in the initial days, Karanji was in constant dialogue with him when he was director. So I think it was together that they formed the policy for the direction which the institution should be taking. So maybe they shared ideas. I mean, I don't think it'll be very correct on my part to talk about that. I can only say that I remember him with a great deal of fondness and a great deal of respect for somebody who was, sort of a kind of representation of unending creativity and, varied, that I've really seen. And a kind of, sort of restlessness and kind of humor, which is so rare, that he used to laugh at himself, and when we laughed at him about his English, and then he would tell jokes about the kind of faux pas he made when when he was talking to somebody in English. But when he spoke in English, he spoke with absolute confidence, whether he was making mistakes. That's a spirit I really loved, sort of that here was a person who was living life to the full, enjoying it, and constantly learning, wanting to learn. It was a very kind of warm personality that you'd like to always recall. It gives a lot of inspiration.